Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of low, or the proliferation that we're seeing in this globalist age of low value add jobs. Now, this low value add jobs can be menial jobs, sweeping the floor, or they can be jobs that are so repetitive that they can be automated to a point where you can give someone a checklist and say, okay, do this, then do that, then do something. So they got their little ticker box checklist, and they can just go through. And pretty much anyone, or it's presumed that pretty much anyone can do that. Now, whether that's a good way of doing things, you can debate, because if the person comes across something they can't figure out, they're meant to escalate it to someone who actually can make a decision without reference to a checklist. But they rarely hand it to that person. If those people who are at the next level or 2 or 3 levels up are also checklist bound and have been simplified so that masses of peasant workers from overseas, brown and black people, can be given these jobs in the West. And so again, there's a desire to simplify to base level and to reduce something to its minimal basics, and then consider that as, if you like, an automated role, whereas before it may have required at least a degree or a level of decision making. So low value add jobs are being created in 3 ways. Illiterate peasants coming from the third world being forced into the West without the agreement of the indigenous or local population, and they bring no skills with them, so everything has to be dumbed down and simplified just so these people can be given jobs. That dumbing down and simplification process is almost universal. And similarly, the creating departments like these huge diversity, equity, inclusion departments, there's a need for people to be ideological enforcement commissars. So they're not meant to understand or know what they're doing, or the ramifications or collateral damage of what they do. They're there to enforce and implement the ideology, as the ideological goons and commissars were and are in the big communist societies of recent history. So we've got a situation where the number of low value add jobs where no decisions need to be made, where there's no particular ingenuity or anything like that, where those jobs are now proliferating. And if you look at, if I go to, say, the biggest internet job boards, and I keep an eye on them, because I like to see the changing ratio, or keep a close eye on the changing ratio between value add jobs and, say, NGO jobs. And something I've mentioned a number of times, 25, 30 years ago, NGO jobs were the lowest paid jobs on the job board. Today, they're the highest paid jobs. So government jobs and NGO jobs are the highest paid jobs. A director of diversity and inclusion in a business or a university or a government department, they're paid more than the fucking prime minister gets paid. A director of diversity at a university is paid double what a chief engineer is paid. A chief engineer in charge of building a large bridge and all the roads and the drainage, everything that goes around a major billion-dollar engineering project, and that engineer is paid half of what the director of diversity is in some government department. That just illustrates, clearly brings home and illustrates just how things have changed. In an HR manager or something like that used to be the lowest paid job in the corporate in the corporate setting, out of the management sort of suite. Today, next to the CEO or the executive vice president, they can be the best paid. So again, it illustrates these changes, but they're not there because they have acquired more skills or more abilities or anything like that, or because they're more germane to achieving commercial success. They're not, far from it. They're there to implement the ideological program, so that ideological workers are being paid now more handsomely than I think they've ever been in human history. And this is all across the Western world, or wherever the globalist project is being implemented. You see these ideological commissars, and they're handsomely paid to be doing the work. And again, there's NGOs. There's a job that I've mentioned a number of times. These are multiple roles. I'm giving you one example where there's a professional. This is working for one of the big NGOs. There's a professional agitator, and they're given an office and staff and facilities on a university campus, and their job is just to mobilise placard wavers and paid protesters to be out on the street at short notice. So, and they've got quite a slick logistical machine there. Now that job is a 3-day-a-week job, so a 3-day-a-week job, and that pays 2.5 times the average wage for someone just to be an on-site agitator at a university for an NGO. Pays 2.5 times the average wage, plus numerous other benefits, international travel, your own parking spot on campus, and those parking spots are expensive. So on a campus there's very limited parking space. So this role carries your own free parking space and other benefits. I mean, with travel and bits thrown in, it's easily 4 times the average wage, just for a 3-day-a-week job as an agitator. So I can't stress enough the proliferation of ideological roles in Western society. Now, again, all at the behest of the globalists, but and they need these ideological enforcement commissars, not just activists on university, but they need them in the judiciary and in the departments of prosecutions and so on. And they're quite handsomely paid for doing that. You can say they're handsomely paid. Either the salary is big bucks, which sometimes it is. The director of diversity is paid big bucks. But also it's because people that you can promote or give these jobs to people who, say, a lot of HR directors and things like that. These are people that are really, they're no better than Starbucks baristas. At best they're Starbucks baristas, and yet they're given these jobs that on a relative basis are quite well paid, prestigious. They're in a nice office. They swan around going to meetings pretending to be important, all this sort of stuff. So you can say, well, you can pick low IQ morons and give them, double the average wage, say, and they think, holy fuck, I've made it. I'm big time. I always knew I was a Hollywood movie star, that sort of thing. But the reality is that they're a minimum wage Starbucks flunky, but they're given a better job. But just looking at the low value add jobs, and I compare this with the days of serfdom. So the medieval Europe is an example, or even the early days of the the British colonies in what later became the United States. But the amount of high value add jobs was there was hardly any. The mercantile age began to change this. The long ocean going vessels conducting trade and so on, commerce, but. And there was an explosion of the need for people who were capable navigators and capable, you had to have the top-notch carpenters and so on the ships, because if something went wrong or something got damaged, you really had to have people who knew what they were doing to fix it. So navigators, obviously, and that created other needs for, say, map makers, cartographers and so on. And people could go out in the field and create and draw good quality maps. The British explorer Captain Cook, who discovered much of the east coast of Australia, in fact nearly all of it, and other places around. The quality of his maps, he was a renowned cartographer, by the way, but the quality of his maps was such, and they were hand-drawn, that they were still being used 100 years after his death. That's how his maps were considered so accurate and reliable. So there were other industries, but the amount of people that high value add expertise related jobs that were in even an economy that by world standards was relatively advanced, the British economy, the standards or the amount of high skilled labour that was needed wasn't really that much. Certainly on you're looking at 1 or 2% of the workforce were needed. Now, you could have various levels of skill. For example, a blacksmith. Now, blacksmiths were needed at the time. They made horseshoes and nails, and they could make implements out of iron, such as could be iron gates and so on. But the work they did was super labor intensive and so on. And if they were going to make the iron gates and some of the bigger ticket stuff, they needed quite a big setup, which they couldn't afford to do themselves. So they really were leasing it or renting the facilities off the local aristocrat who kind of owned everything in the area. So the expertise, as it if you could call it that, were the miller to grind the flour up and put it into a fine powder. The miller had to use the grinding facilities that were again owned by the aristocrat. The peasants just worked in the fields, just doing that. You can say some peasants may be better at timing their crops or whatever, but a lot of the transactions wasn't financial, it was bartering. So the local aristocrat could have the option, well, I won't pay you in wheat this week or this year, or I'll pay you in turnips, or I'll pay you in this and not that. And so there was a lot of barter, and the value of things was unclear. And as long as you got enough to eat, you still had the house, and they still gave you a little place to live in. So the employment wasn't expertise related. Now, it didn't mean that some people weren't better at it than others, and that you could have a blacksmith who was effectively renting the premises off the local aristocrat, and they may have been a better blacksmith than the guy down the road. And so those sort of things still happened. But the idea of high value add jobs being numerous or being many was just not there. There were very few jobs. Now, this didn't mean that there weren't people like artisans who for example, a stonemason or the furniture maker who was kind of the carpenter, if you like, or the weaver who would sit down and weave fabrics and cloth and so on. But this is pre-industrial revolution, but their production methods were very slow. If people were fitter and they were prepared to work sort of more hours, then they could have a higher output. But the reality was that the demand for skilled labour was quite small, because so few people could afford to buy the produce of the artisan or the blacksmith. Wrought iron gates for the front of an aristocrat's estate. There were only 1,000 or so aristocrats in the whole of England who had the financial resources to pay for that. So really the blacksmith was doing the most basic stuff nearly all the time, other than special projects, which they would do for the very small number of people who could afford, the aristocrats who could afford to pay. So I just want to sort of highlight here how few skilled jobs there were. Now, whether you look at them as skilled, completely unskilled, or relatively skilled to something else, but because the technological situation was minimal, this is again pre-industrial and even early mercantile, there were high-skilled jobs there, but there just weren't very many. And the high-skilled, for example, the carpenter on the long ocean-going vessel, they were there, but in the whole of England, there may be 500 jobs for that level of skill. So I just want to, now, when the industrial age came along, that changed, and the ratio of high-skilled jobs, as much due to new technology as the complexity of technology, by the way, and the organisational complexities that came from those things, and the sheer volume of financial transactions that occurred, exporting manufactured goods, things like that. This created a need for an organisational structure, which in turn produced demand for skills at various areas, accounting and so on. So the requirement for skilled jobs increased just exponentially, just exploded. And so the ratio of skilled workers to unskilled or semi-skilled or no skilled, that changed. And it created a class of, it created quite a substantial middle class, people that were had expertise in various areas and also formal training came along. You had formal training with things like you would apprentice yourself to a blacksmith, for example. That's still happening on, but the blacksmith could only afford to take on one person, and they didn't get paid. You just got kind of room and board. That was really it, and then you learned the trade. When the blacksmith then retired at some point, then you would become you would take over the business. But again, you were renting it in effect from the land. It wasn't your business. If the aristocrat said you're out of here, Billy Bob, then you had your skills, which weren't really transportable because of the huge the huge financial cost of getting the bellows and the anvils and all the tools that you needed to be able to have a blacksmithing business. So the skills were one thing, but the financial resources to get all the kit was quite another. So, but the ratio of skilled jobs increased, and as economies and business and organizational structures and technology became more complicated, you then needed technicians to support the equipment and repair it. So it created a very large skilled class of people with high skills and high abilities. Now the second thing was and this is an important factor that occurred during the Industrial Revolution, or the advanced nature of it, was during World War I and World War II. Mass mobilization created an instant, immediate demand for millions of people, not only in the workforce, but in the armed services to operate sophisticated equipment, to supervise those who are operating it, and so on. So this demand for skills, you didn't have enough people who were skilled in any one area, nowhere near it. So there had to be a decision made to say, all right, well, we'll have to put people in the roles who are a quick study, who are, this is a bright guy, he's going to be a quick study, he's keen and eager, and so on. So he's about as good as we're going to get in this role, and with a little bit of training, we can turn him into someone who's capable of doing this job. But you had to accept that the best you're going to get is X, rather than look for some sort of ultimate, the guy's got to have 10 degrees in lesbian dance theory or something. You have to get the best you can get for that, because the qualified people simply aren't around in a situation of mass mobilization. This in turn created not only another, as a result of the wars, this created another class of capability, people that weren't necessarily qualified, but to all practical intents and purposes could do the job. Now, this created another class of skilled or semi-skilled worker, and this was all part of this wider ongoing industrial revolution, which things like the electrical home goods type, washing machines and bread mixers and blenders and that sort of stuff going into the computer age. So again, creating all these skilled jobs. Now we're coming at the back end of this, round the other side, where the demand for skilled, or the ratio between unskilled and skilled, is then heading back towards the serfdom days, where, and for the reasons I mentioned at the outset, where the need for skilled labour is being artificially dampened down to create jobs for the black and brown peasants that are being brought out, but also the automation factor. But more than that, productive jobs, or high skill jobs based in skill and productive output capacities, these things are being dampened down quite substantially. So where you have ideologically in the new globalist world order, the diversity, equity, inclusion director is a more valuable asset to globalization than the highly skilled factory manager. So the factory manager will be paid a quarter of what the diversity, equity, inclusion director is paid, even though the factory manager adds great value to society and to the workforce, and creates jobs for people, all that sort of stuff. He's not paid. He's not going to be paid anywhere near it. So in the new order, ideology is now another determinant, which has the effect not of adding or creating value-add jobs, but of reducing the relative value of other jobs that are actually more beneficial to society, but ideologically have a lesser and lesser place. So if you extend this out to its fullest, then this is the serfdom of the future. It's here now in smaller scale, but as that scale increases, so as more and more illiterate brown peasants get brought in from the third world, and the globalists are utterly determined to do this to the West, then again more and more jobs have to be dampened down or artificial and non-jobs artificially created to give these people employment. And you see it in Australia, these Indians coming out here who from the subcontinent, who Pakistanis or any subcontinent person where they've never actually had a job ever, and they arrive in Australia and they're immediately gifted jobs in the public service and in companies and if the government gives juicy contracts to any company or business in Australia, that business is obligated to instantly increase the amount of, or instantly decrease the amount of white people that they and white men that they employ. It's an obligation that government, being pushed into it by the globalists, that the government forces on these people. And government contracts are making up a bigger and bigger part of the economic pie in Australia, when productive, real competitive, productive industries taking a lower one. So I see a situation where we'll head back to, I hope it doesn't happen, but where we head back to the serfdom days, the medieval serfdom days, where there'll be a very small core of skilled labor and or skilled jobs, high value add jobs. And when I say high value add, I mean high value. I don't just mean a job where you can't automate a plumber's job because they have to crawl under cupboards and they've got to do this and got to do that, and they've got to be able to do things that a machine can't do. But even that, if you look at the plumbers today, they've got every product that they have to, or situation have to look at, they've got a checklist for it. Now, whether they've done the apprenticeship or not, but that increasingly is becoming a checklist thing. I don't know if it can ever successfully be fully checklist, that job, given the variables that a plumber or other tradespeople, carpenters or something may face. But there's certainly an earnest attempt to checklist everything. You see it with mechanics, where the mechanic actually doesn't know anything, especially the newer ones coming through, where they just straight refer to the checklist, or using computer equipment to interrogate the onboard computers in motor vehicles and so on. And their ability to analyze or understand or troubleshoot is about zero. So you can see it happening there as well. So I think we're going back to, and I'm convinced we are actually, going back to a situation in the West where the desire or the need or the requirement for brutish ideology and imposing that ideology on the citizenry will, by extension itself, create this feudal serf environment where low-skilled, where the high-skilled or the high-value-add jobs may be 1 or 2% of the population, if that, and many of those will be just ideological roles. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.